Hello, welcome back to Quilts Bloom at Dawn. I don't know about where you live, but where we live, it stays hot most of the year. But we are so excited. The air is finally starting to get a little bit cooler, a little bit crisper. So, oh my goodness, we can feel those fall vibes. And I'm so excited because today we are officially beginning our first fall project. But first, we will need to finish up our Nantucket Summer, and hopefully you've been working on your blocks. I'm going to just snap a picture real quick so you can see this is what we'll be working on today. And over to the side right here, I actually have this quilt on my design board. So I don't have the blocks put together yet, I've just laid them out. So if you've got all your blocks and you're sitting there with a stack, we're going to work on those today because this is really the fun part where you get to actually figure out your layout. And I'll tell you, I figured that I would end up with too many blocks. I ended up with almost the exact amount I needed. Take a look and see exactly what I've done with mine. Again, mine's a king size. While I use the example that they provide as a guide, I really end up kind of making it my own, because obviously it's so much bigger. Plus, don't forget we added lighthouses to this one. So I'll kind of go through what my strategy was for layout. So we'll take a look at that in just a few minutes. But first, we're going to focus on our first fall project. And that is our pumpkin picking pattern. Now this quilt is actually by, let's see, her name is Christina Brinkerhoff of Center Street Quilts. You can purchase it. Matter of fact, it's in the description, a link to it from American Patchwork and Quilting, their shop. And actually, I saw this quilt during one of our bee meetings. I fell in love with, her name is Autumn. Isn't that a perfect name? So she actually shared her quilt that she had made, and I don't know that I would have actually clicked on this pattern had it not been for seeing her example of it, because rather than going with the oranges as you would traditionally do in fall, she went with more of the sage green color. It's beautiful. Well, I love that color anyway. That's what I decided to do because I actually had fabric, fall fabric, that I had been hoping to use for this fall project. I wasn't sure which one, but it's some fabrics that I've collected over the year. And those, when I saw her quilt, I'm like, I have the perfect fabric for that. So that's going to be our first fall project. We're actually going to do the cutting on all of that today. Another project that I'm definitely hoping to do in the near future is from Laundry Basket Quilts, and they have this pattern that's a trio of 3 fall table runners. So I'm definitely planning to do at least one of these. But today we're going to go ahead and focus on our pumpkin picking pattern. Once we finish getting all the fabric cut for this, we'll turn our attention to our Galway Bay pattern using the beautiful Nantucket Summer collection. We've made all the blocks. All we have to do now is figure out our layout. And that's actually really fun. So we'll look at that and kind of talk about some strategies on that in a few minutes. For now, we're going to go ahead and focus on our pumpkin picking pattern. We're actually going to go ahead and talk about fabrics that you'll need, and I'll actually go ahead and do the cutting for all of this. So we'll go ahead and do this together first. So if you don't already have the pattern, I encourage you to go ahead and go to that description, click on that link, and you can order the digital version. That's what I did. And the finished dimensions of this pattern, it's 57.5 by 73.5. The small blocks are going to be 5 inches, and those are like the leaves, and then you have some small stars. Don't get too overwhelmed when you hear 5-inch blocks because they're really not that difficult. You have a couple half square triangles to make the leaves, but other than that, it's not too difficult. And then it also has some, basically it's 9 patches where you add star points to make the little small stars that are going to go inside our large stars. So it's really not as hard as it seems. So we'll go over that together. Now the large blocks in this quilt, that's going to be the pumpkins and the large star blocks. Those are actually 12-inch size blocks. Now, if you have the pattern in front of you, you see that she has all of the orange tones in her quilt, and those are what she lists on her pattern. If you're planning to do that, you can just literally follow along what she's already listed. However, if you are wanting to do something different, like I said, I'm actually using mostly Corey Yoder's Cozy Up collection. I had gotten a little bundle of fat quarters at our quilt show a while back. Didn't even realize what it was at first, but anyway, I got this little bundle, fell in love with every little fabric that was in that bundle. It's mostly in sage greens, but it does have the orange infused, but again, more of a muted orange. And then at another shop I found, turns out it was two fabrics that I didn't realize when I purchased it, but it actually goes with this Corey Yoder collection. So before it was over, I had essentially picked my favorite fabrics from this collection, and it's just enough to make this quilt. So I'm going to go through and just kind of show you what I'm doing on mine, and also what you'll actually need. Now, I did go ahead, I've already starched all of my fabrics. I just use Faultless spray that I get at Walmart. I don't use anything fancy, but I do spray it pretty good. You can either let it dry, or if you're living dangerously like me, you can go ahead and press it. But when you press, you're literally press, lift, because you don't want to distort your fabric. So I do go ahead when I'm starching and I press mine at the same time. I know that's a no-no, so my recommendation would be let it dry first, but that's not what I do, and I'm just being honest here. But I will warn you, if you do rub your iron, it will, because that's wet at that point, it will distort your fabrics. It took me about an hour to go ahead and get all of my fabrics starched. Okay, so if you're gathering all your things, the background, and I'm using sort of an off-white, kind of a vintage white actually is what it is. I think this is a confetti from Riley Blake. I think that's what I have for this, but it's one of their vintage white colors. And it says you need 3 1/4 yards. That's about what I cut. I think I'm gonna need closer to 3, but they probably have a little bit of waste available for you. So definitely 3 to 3 1/4 yards. The pattern lists that you need 5/8 of your yard total of assorted prints. Those are going to be to make your little leaves. And this is where, if you have fat quarters, this is a perfect opportunity to go ahead and use those. And I do have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fat quarters that are really designated for that purpose. Now you notice I have this fabric here. Now this is actually not part of this collection, but it blended so well, I just wanted to include a little bit, and it's one of Lori Holt's fabrics. So I had some of that, so I thought I'd just bring a little bit of that in. I thought I might use this to make the small pumpkin that's featured in the center. I thought that might be pretty for that. So I'm just kind of holding on. I'm not positive, but I had this little piece left over in my fat quarter bundle. So I thought I'll just go ahead and include that, and I may or may not actually use it. So I have a total of 5 fat quarters that I've already starched. Obviously that's a little more than what I'm gonna need, but I like that variety. So for those small leaves where it says 5/8 the yard, that's what I've gathered is 5 fat quarters. So we also need 5/8 the yard of a brown toned fabric. And within this collection they had, oh my goodness, it's such a beautiful print. I love this. And you know I'm not crazy about brown, but I love this kind of color brown. And it's just the names of trees. Oh my goodness, that is beautiful. And again, that is part of Corey Yoder's Cozy Up collection. So this will be used to make the large star points on those large blocks, as well as on the small star blocks, the 9, you have basically in the center, you have 9 patches. So this will also be used to make those 9 patches. So that's what I'll be using this for. So it says you need 5/8 a yard, so it's not too much. All right, the next thing we need, it says 1 1/4 yards to make the large pumpkins and the outer borders. So for mine, I'm using this. I had 1 fat quarter of it, but then I also had some yardage of it. So that's what I'm using to make my large pumpkins as well as my outer border. Again, I love the sage green color, and I like gingham, so this is just perfect for me. All right, it then says that you need 1/2 yard to make the small star blocks and the large pumpkins. So I wanted to just kind of mention what that is. If you notice on her quilt example, the center of the large pumpkins is 1 print, and then there's two little side pieces, and those, it's actually a different print. It's hard to see because it kind of blends so closely, but it is actually a different print. So my plan right now is to use the gingham for my pumpkin centers. And I just happen to have this Bella Solid that I think is the same color, the sage green, and it blends perfectly. So I'm thinking right now that's what I'm gonna use for those side pieces, is this solid print, along with, this will be the small star, this will be the points for the small star. It also says that you need 5/8 a yard for the binding, and I have not gotten that far yet, so I don't know what I'm doing for my binding. Usually I wait till I've definitely selected what I'm using for my backing, and I like to kind of look at the completed quilt, and I usually figure that out when I'm putting it together at the end. But if you know what you want to use, go ahead and cut that as well. Well, now that we know what we're going to use, let's go ahead and start cutting some fabric. Before we get started on the cutting, I just wanted to mention a couple things that I use to help me. And what I used to use to mark all of my quilt pieces was just these little labels, literally what you would use for garage sale, these little sticky labels. You can get them at grocery store, anywhere. Those are great. And just stick them on your fabric and just put whatever letter you want it to stand for. So these work really great. That's what I've always used. But I did go ahead and splurge, and I bought myself some alpha clippies. These are from It's So Emma. I ordered these from Fat Quarter Shop. They started out with the alpha biddies. They still have those available, but they don't actually clip. I really like the idea that these just actually clip onto your fabric and hold your fabric together. And another little tip, it comes in a little plastic case, but to make it easier for you to actually see what you need, I just used my fabric boards, what I used to wrap my fabric, those comic book boards. I just grabbed several of those and clipped them to the top like this. And so to do the whole alphabet, you can do that in 3 of those. I just like the way this displayed it, where I can see them all like this, just right from the top. And then I put all the numbers on one together. If you do have alpha clippies, it's just a way to help you see them better and manage them. So this is what I'll be probably putting them in some sort of a little basket that I keep near me, and whenever I'm working on projects, I'll just always replace them on this. I think that that's going to work better for me. Okay, so I'm going to set these aside for right now because we're not going to need them quite yet. But whether you use these labels or you use something like this, totally your choice, just a way to keep up with all your fabric pieces. Now, if you notice, I have my background fabric first. That's the one with the most pieces that need to be cut. So I thought we'd start with that. And if you notice, I almost always with my fabric start with them folded this way, where basically I have selvage to selvage, but then I have it folded over one more time. This is the same way I would use to wrap my comic book boards, but I prefer to go ahead and cut this way. I'm a little shorter, and I just find this easier to manage. So I go ahead and cut most of my things folded like this. So the 12-inch ruler is what I use as my primary ruler, since I have it already kind of folded to this size. The other thing I have here that I've fallen in love with is the Stripology rulers. I have 2 sizes. These are made by Creative Grid. I just use them primarily to do my main cuts on my fabric, and then I'll later come back and subcut. So as far as space and cost, I really think this 12.5-inch one is probably the best overall to use. So if you were only going to get one, this would probably be the one I would recommend. Now what I've done, I've taken what she lists for all the backgrounds that you're going to need. I've taken that and basically compiled it so I know how many strips I need to cut. So I'll go ahead and give that to you as we go through. So the first thing I'm going to do, though, I'm going to make sure my background fabric is lined up carefully on my cutting mat. And I want to waste as little as possible, but I want to make sure I have a good starting edge. So I'm going to go ahead and trim with my 12.5-inch ruler first. Now I can just lay my Stripology ruler right on top, right at that nice cut edge I just made. That's my start. Okay. We are ready to start cutting. When I added up all of the cuts that we need for the background fabric, I determined that we needed a total of 3 2.5-inch strips. So I'm going to go ahead and start with that. All right, that's our 3 cuts we need for the 2.5-inch strips. You can see why this makes it so nice. All right, then it says we need 3 2-inch strips. Now, again, you're not going to find this in the pattern. This is what I've done, basically adding up all of the different pieces, and I've determined based on a 42-inch width of fabric, actually I based it on 40 inches, how many cuts we need of each size. So for the 2-inch, I've determined that we need 3 2-inch strips, and 11.5, 13.5. All right, so I've got my 3 2-inch strips. Got 1, 2, 3 2.5-inch strips, and 3 2-inch strips. Look how nice those cuts are. Isn't that amazing? All right, so I'm going to set these aside for the minute. All right, next I need, for 1-inch strips, I know I need 6 1-inch strips. And I need 5 1.5-inch strips. 1, 10.5, 12, 13.5, 6 of my 1-inch cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You really just need 5 of these. The last thing we need of this white is 20 3.5-inch strips. So obviously I don't have much of this fabric left, but I'll finish out what I do have. And I don't even have enough to do a third one. So I only was able to get 2 cuts out of this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get this edge trimmed again like I did before. All right, once I have a good clean edge, I'll put my stripology ruler back. We still have 18 cuts we need to make now. Five more. So my 3 yards that I starched, looks like I'm going to be right on target with that. Now that I have all of my backgrounds in the strips, I'm ready to go ahead and start the subcutting. So I'm all about getting all the things that I need gathered together. So you see I've got my alpha clippies, or if you're using, whatever you're using to mark, you can go ahead and grab those. Now this pattern does not actually give you letters to use. However, I did go ahead and assign letters to all of my pieces. When you're dealing with as many pieces, especially with a background, it's just easier to have it pre-labeled. So I did assign letters, and I will give those to you as I go through. So the other thing I like to go ahead and pull is whatever rulers I'm going to use to help me in the subcutting process. Some people just go ahead and use 1 or 2 rulers to do all of your cuts. If you're doing that, just go ahead and grab what you need. However, if you do like to use some of the square rulers, you can go ahead and grab those. So the ones that I have my 1.5 inch, my 2.5 inch, and my 3.5 inch. Those I know I'll be using. Most of my rulers are creative grids. So this is one of my favorites. They're 2.5 by 4.5. Love this one. And then I love my 12.5 inch rulers in length. And then I have a 1.5, a 2.5, and a 3.5. So that's all the things that I have pulled to help me in the subcutting. Obviously, you don't need all of this. You can literally just use probably a 2.5, use your mat and do all your subcutting that way. So whatever your preferred method, but I do encourage you to go and gather everything. I just find it helpful to have everything ready to go before I start. Okay, the first thing I'm going to start with is I'm going to get my 2.5-inch strip. And I know I need 24 total. I need 24 2.5-inch squares. I have a total of 3 2.5-inch strips in front of me here. All right, so I know I need 24 of these. $12, 18, and 24. All right, and I'm going to label these as M. I usually use these trays, so go ahead and get whatever you're going to need to hold your fabric, but that's what I'll be stacking all of these in, is one of these trays. All right, the next thing I need 12 of the 2-inch squares. Four, 8, 12. Okay, so I've got 12 of these 2-inch squares, and this is going to be in. So I'll go ahead and add that here. Next, we need our 1-inch strips. It's going to be 1 inch by 5 inches. And it looks like we need 12 of these. I think I'll stack 3. And just make sure you have a nice straight stack before you start. All right, I'm going to line this up and trim this off. I actually grabbed one more ruler. All right, so it says I need 1 by 5 inches. So I've trimmed this edge here. So I'll go ahead and get this cut to 5 inches. That's 6 of those. And 6. So we now have 12 5-inch strips. And this will be O. Now we need 12 5.5-inch strips. Six. Wow, that was just enough. I literally had just enough to go ahead and get all of those cut. So I have 12 1 by 5.5. So this is going to be P. Again, these are not, you're not going to find these letters in the pattern. This is what I've just figured out to help me. All right, next is our 1.5-inch strips. Okay, what I'm actually using here is, I'm going to do something different than the pattern. I'm going to make a strip set. So I'm going to go ahead and cut one 20-inch strip that I'll end up using to do to create a strip set. So I'm actually just going to mark this one on my mat. Just cut it to the 20-inch mark. Okay, so I'm going to take this one strip and it's going to be Q. All right, then the other thing I need with my 1.5-inch strip is, let's see, 2 10-inch. And again, this is not in your pattern. This is what I'm using to create strip sets. So I needed 2 of these, and I'm labeling this as R. Anytime I can, like on those 9 patches, anytime I can make strip sets, it's just quicker. You don't have to sew each one on. So I always try to do that if possible. All right, I need more of my 1.5-inch strips. I need a total of 24 of these, so I'm going to go ahead and grab 3 strips and stack them. I think that's just going to be easier and quicker. I don't like to sacrifice quicker for less accurate, but if I can save time, I look for opportunities to improve my efficiency. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and get this subcut. Looks like I'm doing 3.5 inches here. And I need a total of 24 of these. Okay, I've got all of these cut. So this is going to be S, is what I'm calling it. Now I need lots of squares. If you don't have this 1.5 inch square from Creative Grids, I highly, highly recommend it. They have this one, and they also have a 1.5 by 2.5. That's a really good one too. But anyway, I use this a lot, and it just really helps with accuracy. I need 24 of these. All right, so I've got all of my little squares that I need, and I will label this as a T. All right, I'll take one of those leftover pieces that I had, and I need one, it says 1.25 inch square. So this is 1.5. Let's see, that's going to be 1.25. That's another thing I love about their rulers. They have so many markings. So there I can make it a 1 inch, has my markings all laid out. So 1.25 inch would be right here, and then 1.5 inch would be the whole thing. So they really thought of everything with these rulers. All right, that's all I need was one of those. And let's see, this is going to be U, is what I'm marking it. Totaling my 2 inch strip again. And I need 2 of the 2 3/4. I'll go ahead and leave this folded. So 2 3/4. Let's see, that's going to be right there. All right, so this will become V. Back to my 1.5 inch strips here. And it looks like I need 4 more of these 1.5 inch squares. And the reason I'm not doing it all at once, obviously these are for different sections within the quilt, and it's just easier for me to know what I'm going to be using it for, and so that's why I don't just group them together. This will be W. All right, I'm back to my 1 inch strips. I'm going to go ahead and grab the remaining 3 that I have over here of those. So I need 10 of these, and I'm subcutting to 5.5 inches. And this is going to be X. And then what I'm going to mark as Y is going to be similar, only it's going to be 6.5 inch strips instead of 5.5 inch. I need 10 of these as well. All right, this will now be Y. Now we're going to pull from our 3.5 inch strips. We're going to go ahead and stack 3 of these. I need 20 3.5 by 6.5. So this ruler I'm just lucking out is 3.5 by 6.5. So sometimes you luck out. I need another strip because I only have 18 and I need 24. So I need to get 6 more of these. So I think I'll be able to do that with this one strip. Okay, so I'm going to end up doing this as Z. Again, I have 24 of these. Okay, I messed up. I only needed 20 of these, not 24. All right, so I have them, the 20 that I need, labeled as Z. I'm going to go ahead and put these back so I can reuse them. I'm definitely going to need them as we go further. So now I'm going to need some 3.5-inch squares. Let's see, I need a total of 20 of these. All right, got all my squares cut. And this, I ran out of letters, so I turned to numbers. So we're going to call this number 1. I'm going to go back to my 2-inch cuts, and I just need one 7-inch strip, but it's not actually 2 inches, it's 1 3/4. So I'm going to first just go ahead and get a 7-inch strip. And now I can go back and trim down. So that would be 2 inches, right? So we want it to be 1 3/4. Okay, so this is going to be number 2 is what I'm calling this one. And I only needed one of those. I'm back to my 3.5-inch width. I need a total of 8 3.5 by 6 inches. So not quite what we did before, just slightly reduced. Okay, and that is all we needed was 8 of those, and that's what I had here to cut. I'm going to call this number 3. Next thing I need is 2.5-inch squares. All right, so I've got my 16 2.5-inch squares, so I'm going to call this number 4. The next thing I need is, I'm grabbing my 1.5-inch strip. I have one of those left, and looks like I need 8 5.5-inch strips. We'll see if I have enough from this one. Okay, I need a little more, so I'm going to grab one of my 2-inch cuts. Looks like I just need one more of these, so I'll just use this and I'll trim down. And I do that intentionally sometimes. If I end up with extra of one, I can just always trim it down to get what I need. Now I've got what I need here. It should be 8, and I'm going to call this number 5. Go ahead and keep this 2-inch strip out because I need it next. And I need 4 of these cut 5.5 inches. I'll label this as number 6. And now I'm going to go ahead and pull my 3.5-inch strips again. I'm going to be cutting 6 12.5-inch sashings like that. All right, so that's 4, and I need 6. So I'll take these 2 strips now and open them out. Okay, so that's the 6 strips I needed for this. I'm labeling this as number 7. Okay, what I have labeled now is number 8. I know I need 4 strips, width of strips. And this is going to become my sashing strips. So I'm going to label this as 8. And then I need 6 to be my inner border. And I'll label this as 9. This will be 8 and 9. So this, like I said, I won't be needing these till we're done making all of our blocks, but I'll go ahead and have what I need when I do. This is all of the excess that I have from my cuts, and I will definitely keep this handy. But chances are I'll make a mistake through the process, and I'll be glad I have these extra pieces. On my tray here, I have all of the background pieces that we've gone on ahead and pre-cut. And I just wanted to mention again, the pattern did not include all of these letters, numbers. This was just something that I do to help me. So before I began, I went through and figured out what all we needed and labeled it. And then I shared through this process what those letters were to correspond. Okay, we are done with the background, but we still have our prints, and these are going to be fun. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those, and we'll keep going. Okay, to go ahead and get started, I will be using the A through L. That's what I'll be using now for all of our prints. The first thing I'm going to do is cut what I need for my leaves, and we need a total of 24 2.5-inch squares. I go ahead and do this in 2 steps. So I'm selected 3 of my fat quarters, and then I have the other 2 that I'll grab and do the same thing within a minute. The first thing I want to do though is get a clean edge on these 3. I'm going to trim this off. So not much waste, but it certainly gives me a nice starting point. I'm going to go ahead and do 1 strip. And then from there, I'm going to subcut. Now these are actually going to be used to make half square triangles. But I like the idea of having a variety to pull from. So that gave me 6. $12. 18. I'll set these aside. Now I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I want to go ahead and finish cutting my squares. So I'm grabbing my other 2 fat quarters that I'm using for this. And that is, look how pretty that is. Oh my goodness, I love that. Same thing, I'll do 1 strip. Set that aside. And now I'll go ahead and subcut. Now this is more, I am cutting a little bit more than what it asked me for. And that is intentional. I like to have more options, so when I start making my leaves, I may want more of this one or more of this one. So it just gives me flexibility. So that's why I did cut a few more. So I'll just have extra scraps when I'm done. But all in all, I have at least 24 of these. And so I'll go ahead and label these as A. I'm going to go ahead and continue using this one since it's in front of me. But I'm going to end up doing 2-inch strips on this because I need 48 2-inch squares. And again, this is all to make my leaves. So I'll go ahead and cut 2 of these. All right, now I'll go ahead, I use my 2.5 again, the Creative Grids. This is, again, what I love about it. You literally could use this to do 1 inch. Here's the 1.5 inch. And there's a 2 inch, and then of course 2.5 inch. So it just gives you so many options in one little ruler. Okay. And now cut 2 more strips out of these prints, because again, I said I needed a total of 48. I know between all that I'm cutting, I will have plenty. Okay, so I have a very big stack here because I needed 48 of these, but this is going to be B. So I'll just put this around what I can, but I'll just leave this stacked together. All right, the next fabric that I have is this brown fabric here. And I'm going to end up using it to make strip sets. So again, I'm not following the pattern here. If you're following it, I believe it's 1.5 inch squares. But I'm going to go ahead and make strip sets, sew those together, and subcut to make my 9 patches. So I know I need 2 20-inch strips and 1 10-inch strip to make my 9 patches. So it's so much quicker to do it that way. So I'll go ahead, and this is yardage, and so it's 42 inches long. So let's see. So 2 strips should be all that I need to cut of this. I'm going to make 2 of these 20 inches long. All right, so I'm going to make these 2 20-inch strips. I'm going to call them C. And again, these are to make my strip sets. So again, this is a little different than what the pattern has listed. Then I just need 1 more 10-inch strip. All right, so I'm going to call this D. The next thing that I'm cutting is actually, I'm using the solid green fabric, and this is for the small stars. We have the center of the 9 patches, but then you have the star points. For those star points, I'm using this solid green. So I'll go ahead, and we need 48 of these cut. So I should just need 2 strips, and these are 1.5 inch squares that we're working on. All right, I'll go ahead and get these subcut. I need a total of 48, so I'll be working on that. Okay, so I have a total of 48 of these squares, and I'm going to call them E. Next thing we need is just 1. For the brown, we need 1 1.25 inch. So I'll go ahead and I had this leftover brown, so that makes it easy. And this will be F. Just this one little piece. The next thing we're going to cut is actually going to be the actual pumpkin, the small pumpkin. And this is where I'm using, again, this is that Lori Holt fabric. I just thought that might be pretty for that little pumpkin. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and just cut this based on 5.5 inch square, and then I'll subcut it. This is what I'm gonna set aside as my pumpkin, that small pumpkin in the center, and this is gonna be G. Okay, for this next cut, I actually need a bunch of them. It's gonna be 40 3.5 inch squares. I'm gonna go ahead and use my Stripology ruler to help me do that. I just feel like I get more accurate results when I do it. I think I'll be able to get this out of, I think I'll be able to get all the cuts I need out of 4 of these strips. So I need a total of 40 of these squares. All right, so I have this left over, and this I'm going to label as H. All right, so this extra leftover is actually going to be used to make my next cut. And I'm actually doing another little strip set here. So I'm going to end up doing 1 7-inch strip. But I am going to subcut down. Doesn't need to be quite this wide. It's actually 2 3/4. All right, so this will be I. All right, the next thing, I'm using my gingham print here to make the big pumpkin cuts. So I'm actually going to just right now focus on the width, and I'm going to do a 9.5 inch cut. And I'm using the extra fat quarter that I had to do this. So let's see. Now that I've got the width, I'm going to focus on the length of it. So I'm going to just trim that off first. So I was able to get 4 out of this fat quarter. So this is going to be labeled as J. All right, the next thing I'm going to need, this is going to be the little side pieces of these pumpkins. So this would basically be the center with this on the sides of it, with these little strips on the side. So that's kind of the look that I'm going for. So I'm going to need a total of 16 of these 2.5 inch squares. I should be able to get all 16 from this one, and this is with the fabric here. I think I'll go ahead and leave it folded. So I can do 4 at a time. All right, so this is going to be K. So these squares were used, these are going to make folded corners for our pumpkin. And then the last thing I'm going to do is actually make the side strips for the pumpkin. So again, these are going to be 2.5 inches wide, and we'll subcut down. So I'll need 2 strips to do this. All right, I'm going to go and just stack these, trim off and the fold. I'm pretty much using almost all of this. All right, so that is 8 of my L's. All right, so this is what I'm using for them, those big pumpkins. So that'll be the center. These are the side panels, and this will make the folded corners. So hopefully that's going to look pretty. Jury's still out. If I don't like it, it is subject to change. But at this point, I think I'm going to like it. My plan is to use this gingham to do that outer border. So I think that's going to be really pretty. Okay, our tray is complete. Look at all of that. Everything is cut, and we are going to be ready to start making our pumpkins. That's all we're going to do on this today, but stay tuned. The next video we will be making our first blocks. All right, here it is, the Galway Bay pattern on the display board, and this one is actually designed to be king size as opposed to what the pattern called for. So if you're making it by the pattern, it is a 74-inch square, which would end up being 14 blocks across and 7 rows down. However, to make mine king size, I actually went with 20 rows across and 10 rows down. So I'll begin to break this down so you can kind of see what I did. And I did spend a fair amount of time doing this. So the first tip though is don't overthink it, just have some fun with this process. I did model my layout after the example in the pattern. So if you notice, the first row is primarily the houses. So I did the same thing, pretty much houses with a few pinwheels and some solids. Now for mine, I ended up just doing 3 houses, and then I would space it with either a solid block or a pinwheel. If you'd prefer to have a longer row of the tall houses, go ahead and do that. Matter of fact, I think on my previous quilt, I did do more of the houses in a row. But on this one, I just went on ahead and did 3 at a time. All right, so that brings us to the second row. And if you notice, this is where the lighthouses start coming in. Essentially, the lighthouse rows are really 2 rows. It's what it ends up taking up, because basically when you put 2 of these rows together, it should equal the size of our lighthouse. So when I begin to piece this, I will basically do, for example, this will be sewn together and then sewn to the lighthouse. So I'll do that all the way across. So essentially your lighthouse, even though I'm considering this 2 separate rows, it's essentially going to be 1 large row. I believe it's either 12 or 12.5 inches per the pattern. So you'll be trimming off between 2 and 3 inches total. So what I did is I measured the width of my block. So I subtracted 9.5 inches from the width of my block to determine what I would actually need to cut. And so for example, if I needed to cut off 2.5 inches, I would end up actually cutting off 1 1/4 off one side and 1 1/4 off the other side. That way your lighthouse will stay centered and you'll end up again with the dimension that you need. As far as how I laid the lighthouses out, I ended up using, I cannot believe this, I had made 8 lighthouses for the king size. I ended up using every one of them. Now when I previously made this by the pattern directions, I actually ended up making 3 lighthouses and I used all 3 of them. But I guess because this is so large, I cannot believe this. I used every single block I had made for this king size. Every block, every lighthouse, every boat, every house. I just cannot believe I used every one, every pinwheel, and I even cut. I wasn't sure how many of the solid blocks I would need, So I wanted to err on the side of less rather than overdoing it. I did have to come back and add some more of those solid blocks. So I think I ended up probably adding in probably about 8 more solid blocks from what I had originally cut. Okay, so the lighthouse rows, so basically the 2 rows together, really the focus of this is the lighthouses and the boats. That's really the focus of this. So the rows with the lighthouses, I really don't focus on the houses. If I felt like it needed a little something else, I'd put them in. But so as far as the layout, I did pretty much include the lighthouses with some boats scattered across. So if you notice on this row, I end up with 2, and on this row, 2 boats. But yet I'm really trying to kind of get that scattered look. And then other than that, really there's not too many houses. I think I have 2 houses here and 2 houses there, and then really everything else is either the solids or some pinwheels. In all, we end up again with 20 blocks across. And when I'm saying the block size, I'm really going based on this size, not the lighthouse size. So this would be what, 5 by 9.5 inches. So I end up with a total of 20 of those going across, and then a total of 10 going down for my king size. All right, so after I do this lighthouse row, I'm essentially repeating everything that we've just done. Not obviously exactly, but just that same idea. So this is essentially a house row, just like I did on the top row. And then the next 2 rows are going to be the lighthouse blocks, again with the boats, the pinwheels. After I do that, I repeat the entire process again. And I know you probably can't see it because it's too far down, but after this lighthouse, then below that is a whole nother row of houses, followed by a whole nother row of the lighthouses and boats and pinwheels. And then I end the last row, which I don't even have room on my display board, but I have all the blocks in order right here. This is actually another row of houses all ready to go. That's going to be, again, that 10th row. So if you're not making one this size, if you're going with the size that's listed in the pattern, the 74-inch squared, obviously yours is going to be much more manageable. You'll end up, like I said, with 14 across and 7 down with a spattering of the lighthouses mixed in. Just make sure you do trim down those lighthouses so that way your rows will be the correct width across and everything will line up nicely. So my plan is to go ahead and begin sewing all of this together. It won't be hard to put together, but it will take a little bit of time because, again, our block size is fairly small, so we have a lot to sew together. So that's what I'll be working on, is getting all of these rows put together. So a couple more things I wanted to just mention. I know I've had several people who have asked about the blue, and that was a big decision for me. I wasn't sure whether I should just go with my traditional white background or whether I was going to be brave and go with a colored background, but I did end up deciding to go with the blue. And I've had several people ask what this is. So this is actually the Bella Solid, and the color is Glacier Blue. I selected this one because I know that it does blend with the Nantucket Summer. It's actually a recommended color, and if you look at it against the Nantucket Summer collection, look at that. It's essentially that same color. And so it's really just bringing it out. The negative to using it, though, is it's not going to be as much of a color pop against something like this. However, you will be able to use more of the lighter fabrics if you have any white, any of your Nantucket Summer prints that are predominantly white. Those will really look good against this blue. And then, of course, all of the navy, even the darker blues will. But this kind of a little bit lighter blue, it's going to definitely kind of blend. I did use this, but it does blend more. It's not, the contrast is just not as, it's not there as much. So that's what I'll be working on over the next few days, is definitely getting all of these blocks sewn together. now that we've seen the layout. Now, I likely will play with it. I've been tweaking it. Honestly, since I put it up there yesterday, I've come through and changed it every time I walk through. So I'm likely going to keep doing that until it's actually sewn together. But to me, that's the fun, creative part of the process. So I actually really enjoy that. Once I get everything sewn together, then I'll be adding the inner border, which I've already pre-cut those, and it's just more of the background, and that'll go around all sides of the quilt. Now, I haven't cut my outer border or my binding, and that's intentional. I really like to kind of wait and decide on that till the end. And on something like this, where really I'm going to want to make sure I get my dimensions right, since I know it's going on my bed, I'll actually go lay it on the bed and just see how much I want it hanging down on either side. So for mine, what I'll end up doing is once I get this inner border, I'll go ahead and lay it out and just see how much overhang I'm going to want. That way I can make sure when I cut my outer border, I'm getting exactly what I'm going to need, no more, no less. At this point, again, I'm not cutting anything yet. I'm not making any final decisions, but I'm likely going to use this as my outer border. Even though it blends with my background, it really is intentional, since really it's going to be on my bed and going to be kind of an overhang. I think I'm going to want that. Since it's really going to be on the bed, I don't know that I necessarily want a strong contrasting border. So I kind of like the idea of having this kind of blend with my background. I am planning, though, this is the striped from the Nantucket Summer. That's what I'm leaning toward using as my binding. Again, I'm not going to cut this yet, but that is what I'm planning to use. So I'm not sure how far I'm going to get. This is definitely what I'll be focused on, getting all of these rows sewn together and finishing up this quilt top. I've been loving playing with all my Nantucket Summer, but I can honestly say I am looking forward to some fall projects now. And I encourage you, if you haven't already purchased the pumpkin picking pattern, I encourage you to get it and join us. This is really going to be a beautiful quilt, and if you're like me, you likely have something in your stash that you can pull from. On our next video, we'll definitely be working on fall, and we'll begin putting together our blocks for the pumpkin picking pattern. Thanks so much for joining me today, and until next time, happy quilting.